we're going a little bit over time, but it is an important part of the discussion that we can get the insights and get the answers to some of the things that you're mulling around in your heads from the last one. So I'm happy to open it to the floor straight away if you wish, if anyone has a question to pose.
How are you doing? Question for Lisa. Do you look at acceleration and deceleration?
Yeah, so if I could explain, so the performance analysis department has over, give or take, 200 analysts. So in a game, each analyst assigned to one player, and then if your player goes off, you're off. If your player comes on, you're on. Then we have the data scientists and the data engineers, and then there's algorithms that check. If I say my player passes to that player, and then the person coding that player says that player receives from that player, the algorithms then check, and if they don't align, then there's 4 or 5 guys and girls that are sitting there, and they're checking those as they come in. So that's in the live data. Then on top of that, we have the observations of the coaches who've played and who've played or coached at that level. So whichever tournament we're at, if it's men's under 17s, 20s, senior, or if it's women's 17s, 20s, or senior, Club World Cup or Beach Soccer World Cup, which is always a nice one. So we have that, and then we have the football language, which was created. So the football language is to give the transparency about the definition in which each event is coded. So if we say it's an offer to receive in behind, that means the player has offered to receive either by a hand movement, by body movement, or by eye contact to receive the ball in behind the defensive line. Same with a mid-block. So a mid-block means that at least 8 of the outfield players must be in the middle third of the pitch for a minimum of 3 seconds and moving at less than 10 kilometers per hour. So they're not pressing. So that's how so every metric and every detail is defined. It's not to say it's right or wrong, because other coaches will have different interpretations, but that's to give the clarity about how we are coding it and what it means when you read those numbers. Then on top of that, so we have the coaches, we have that, and then we have the physical data. And then what you can do is we can map the physical data on top of the game and the moments of the game and the phases of the game. So then you can start to see what's happening in different phases and stuff in the game. So the accelerations and decelerations, so explosivity is one of the biggest pieces now at the moment. Those high-speed running, the accelerations. So we can see the number of A cells, the D cells, the high-speed runs, the volume in games. But what you can't see, and this comes back to the coaching, like at the World Cup, I got to be pitch side for Argentina's game against Croatia. Lionel Messi was, say, from me, sorry, I don't know your name.
I'm James.
So when he, James, so for this, you're Messi, okay? So he was that distance from, when he made that run, that blew everybody's minds to create the assist for the goal. But what he did was, when he received the ball, and to get the defenders coming to him, he slowed down. He slowed down to draw the defender into him and to slow the defender down. When he had the defender almost static, he's gone. He explodes out. He has that acceleration. So that's how he gained his margin. Defender's now out of the game. We can't necessarily equate that in data. How many times he does that in the game doesn't tell you the moment that he does it that matters, or where the defender is in relation to it, or how he affected, how what he did in that duel got him out of that duel to give him the margin to go. So that's where we do have that data, and again it's contextualizing it. So we have it, but more I think the value in that is the volume of those in the game. How are they, what moments of the game, so is it happening when they're counter-attacking, is it happening when they're pressing, so when in the game are those accelerations happening, and what volume will the player need to be doing, So that can translate potentially then to the actual coaching and training sessions.
Any other questions?
I'll just talk.
Yeah.
I guess this could be for anything, but is there a particular piece of data that you find athletes are getting overwhelmed by, or they're resistant to, are getting anxious about? Like, given everything that you have access to, is there one particular piece of data that they hate?
Is there anyone particular you'd like to aim it to? Or
You see, there's a few that could answer, Lisa or Yvonne maybe.
As a former forward, a lot of the feedback we get is hitting the ropes. So actually, it depends, like you said, how do you contextualize it? How do you quantify it? And what a lot of coaches now are finding is that a player isn't actually engaging in the rope. What they're doing is leaning in and putting their hand there, because suddenly that means their stat metrics are going up. And it goes back to what I was talking about, that fear of being called out if you're not hitting the metrics. And this is why you need to make sure you're measuring the right metrics, because it's just being at the rope, being effective, or is it what happens, are you actually keeping that ball with your team? Are you managing to push the opposition off? Are you doing something that's effective rather than just being there? So there's a lot of different examples like that, depending, like rugby is so positional, so every position would have a different example of it. But if you're measuring the wrong metrics, you're going to get the wrong response from the athlete.
Yeah, probably goes back. So there's probably not one metric, but it goes back probably to one I think clearly is either effort or intensity. So and that can be measured anywhere in the pitch. Other than that, it's very situational and what you're expecting the player to do. But that's when there's the wrong contextual of what the coach expects of you. So it is very different depending on how you want to play.
And that one is a great one, because sometimes the total distance covered, that's grand, you've done well. Where were you running? You know what I mean? What runs were you making? And like just to put a little one on for Argentina's game against Netherlands in the World Cup in the quarter-final, at half-time, Messi had only 2 players on the pitch that cover less distance than Messi on the pitch, and they were the 2 goalkeepers. Would you take them off? Because of his lack of effort. So again, it's the contextualization of it, and I think it's a really important point. I think a couple of you have made it about when you're presenting information to players, it can become really overwhelming. They just want the little detail, the one or two that will make the difference to their performance or to their ability to get the margin in the game. And I think if you can do that, and you have to take control. They go, oh, what's my crosses like? Sean McGuire, what's my percentage of crosses? Don't worry about them. It doesn't matter. What was your role? Did you do it well? Did you make a difference? Did you win the corner that we scored the goal from? So we might see certain metrics that we go, okay, we might, certain numbers only stay, I think players can have access to too much data themselves, and they don't understand what the data is or what it means or how they're being judged. And for me, that's one of the more dangerous things, because honestly, I've had players come in, but I couldn't sleep last night. I was looking at I was really trying, but you're going, hang on a minute. Were we asking you to do that this week? No. Well, then forget about it. We asked you to do this. So I think the amount of data that the players are given, I think, can be, because they overthink and they're competitive, they compete with themselves as well as their opponents. So I think you have to be really careful about the amount of the data that the players are exposed to.
And the analysts as well. I mean, I spoke to an analyst one time and we were talking about GPS. And they said, well, what do you record? So every training session, every match, every single thing they do. Why? Well, because we have the tool to do it. So therefore we're recording. And I said, well, what are you doing with it? We don't have a clue what we're doing. We're still recording though, because we know we need to. So there's an overwhelming sensation for the analysts as well in terms of what's going on. And this is where we need to simplify maybe in some respects. Just because we can measure it doesn't necessarily mean that we should.
Just there's one point that takes up the two of them. I think coaches, we need to, coaches probably need to be more empowered. Coaches are the gatekeepers. You decide what's going to be collected, You decide what's going back to players. You're the filter, you're the gatekeeper. So you may have access to a load of information, but it's you decide. The coach must decide what's as opposed to, Robert, okay, look at all the shiny tools and look what he can do. Okay, but Robert, I only need this and this. And that's all I want, because otherwise we end up with this scenario. So coaches must take that role as the gatekeeper and must really own that. And I think a lot of coaches kind of feel under pressure, and they don't realise how much advocacy they have and need to have. So coaches, gatekeeper, coach is king, although that's not very gender neutral. And I don't know a female group, but that's the coach is king. The coach has to be the gatekeeper in terms of the data that comes in and out.
But they're often not data people.
Exactly.
Which is probably a challenge.
Yeah.
They're not, so I think it goes back to, are we using the data we have, and then what you talked about in terms of the role of the data science or the data visualizer, and say, here's the art of what's possible and how it applies to the individual player and then the team, the coach, the S&C person, because the amount of data we have is just going to explode even further. So how do you make sense of it? And that's in the business world as well as on the sport field.
I think John made a really good point, actually. It has to start with a question. So if you could, and that's as a coach, you don't need to understand the data or what's available. You can ask a question, say to your analyst, how effective were we? Okay, we targeted crosses today, or we targeted this. How effectively were we at doing that? That gives your analyst then a point to start. So even though you may not necessarily, they might come back and go, actually we can't measure that, or we don't have access to that data, or actually when I was looking at this I found this is really quite interesting. So, and again, then you're giving the analyst the opportunity to interpret what they find and come back with an answer and say, well actually we were really effective at crossing from the right this time, or whatever. So I think that's such a valid point. You don't have to understand the data, you have to understand what answer you want.
Is, to your point as well, it's fascinating watching from the early implementation of tech and how players adapted to it. So if you think of when GPS came in, and then you get a chance to watch how players, their kind of reaction to it. So this was early days at Celtic, and you watch a training session, and the sports scientists would let me know that there's 3 players there who turned that kit off because they do not want to be monitored. So then it has to be a champion, like you said. The champion is saying, you're giving information now that you're performing at a level that people aren't necessarily seeing. You have a contract negotiation coming up. There's a question about your age. You have evidence now to show that you are going as good as whatever. So one of the managers at the time, he set it up, the sports scientist came in mid-session with the piece of paper. There was nothing really on it, but the idea was that he had some report of what's happened in that first half of training. The coach at the time, the manager went, okay, that's all good, we're on good metrics, game day -2, we've done enough, you can go home now, tomorrow's off, except for you and you, because I've no data. That changed culture immediately. But unless there's a champion and buy-in, now you get to the difficult place where there's a contract negotiation going on, there's a cartridge of data that exists for you, not just on the distance you've covered, but every single part of how you, it's like buying a car, 100,000 clock, I'm giving you every single kilometre that was driven of every single game. Now it's coming into, how can I use that data to help negotiate my new contract, and who owns it? Is that my cartridge to bring in, to plug into a system that says, I'm 32 but I'm still as? So,
actually, I think there's another good point in that, sorry to jump in, but I think it's really important that we don't just use data as a stick to beat players with. We must use it as an opportunity to motivate them. I'll give you an example, and I'm sure John Coffey won't mind me saying, in the first year with Galway United, we wanted to press a certain way. John really likes the team to press aggressively, and some of these lads have never pressed in their lives, and I always say, you're either, pressing in football is like pregnancy. You either are or you're not. There's no middle ground. So with some of the lads, they're kind of flaking up and shaping, they're still 3 yards away, and you're going, you're not pressing. So, but we wanted to be aggressive in how we pressed. So what I did was I brought in the numbers of the meters per second of the top players in the Premier League. So the average was 8 meters per second in the data that we showed them. And in the SPL, I think it was in Scotland, it was 12 meters per second. That was huge. We just put it up and said, right, that's, look, these are what the metrics are, look, this is what it's like in the Premier League, this is what it's like in different leagues, and here's where you are. In June, we put those metrics up, so every week we were doing our training session, never talked about trying to make them faster, never even mentioned it. Put up the data, and I had one player who wasn't at 8 metres per second, and he's an older guy, he's still playing, and he was the only, and he was fractionally off it. And he came up to me, and as we were going out, I was like, listen, unbelievable, I can't believe, like, this is amazing. You've done this. You've put in the work. You've done that. And we were walking out, and he came up to me and he went, I'll hit that today. And I was like, okay. And he did. And he did. But psychologically for them, they were all now at a different level. So when we were asking them to press, we could drop off a metre or two to lure the opposition into a false sense of security, and they knew we could get there faster, and they also knew that if we lost the ball and we were transitioning to defend, that if I can delay him for 2 seconds, I know he can recover 16 metres. And that was the power of that. We never talked about making them faster or asked, so with the fitness coach we talked about, this is what we're trying to do, we're trying to increase their explosivity, their A cells, their D cells, to keep no soft tissue injuries. But every one of those players by June was 8 metres per second, which not in my wildest dreams did I think they'd get there. And every one of them did, but they did it, and that's how you can use data to empower them and to incentivize them and to motivate them. And then they feel that achievement because they're the ones that do it. So it's not always just a stick to people, but it can be a real great motivator for them too.
Brilliant, Lisa, thanks. Just if I could pose a question to you, Robert, just on broader than the professional or the elite side of the game as well. I had a shoulder surgery, actually, I had 2 shoulder surgeries, which would be in part due to posture. So I was very interested in the biomechanics. And I was just wondering, like, is there a broader role for that? Where, you see in primary schools, there's eye tests, there's dental tests. Is there a broader role for that in society and in healthcare in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're kind of touching on is physical literacy and our abilities to control our bodies, and posture fits into that. And I'm a prime example of someone who did not pay attention to that when I was growing up, and I had very poor posture and sore back, and I've had back surgery myself. There is a role for that, absolutely. So we are actually looking, at the moment in terms of, is there a wearable solution? We can do a functional movement screen, and that takes place in classrooms, and it takes place in sports halls with children all the time. But we're trying to think, well, is there a wearable solution that can do that, so that a parent could do it for their own child, or a teacher could do it in the classroom? And I think there's definitely scope. I think it's an emerging area, not just for the elite world, but for everybody to benefit. Excellent. Well, we should definitely have a conversation. So.
That'd be lovely. I wanted to ask if it's okay, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Eva, is it?
Me?
Yeah.
Bronya.
Brian, I'm so sorry I came in kind of late. Your animation is so good. On slide 2 of your PowerPoint, there was and on slide 3 as well, there was a lady doing a plank, and was it a media pipe library? You were talking about AI.
Do the plank.
Yeah. She was in a plank, and it was like a
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Was
Yes.
it media pipe?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, what was it?
Go on, look at the reference.
Could I?
You can, of course, I can shout out it's in front.
And I think Emma Meehan is in
She
she was
was
here.
here.
She's somebody again who's developing exactly what you're talking about, specifically for strength and conditioning, but it has relevance in everyday life
Yeah.
as well.
And there's a specific one in the US called MIRR, which detects sensors to tell you if your posture is correct.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's very similar to what Emma has. Yeah.
And if I could pose a similar question to you, John, in that 20 years of stats that you do have, what's the role for that? What's the possibilities for it in the world?
That's a huge question. But it's I suppose one that motivates me is that we get this unique opportunity to work with the best, the elite. And then you look at the kind of recovery strategies that they use. And then this is leading to a research project that we have with the National Breast Cancer Research Institute here in Galway. So you think of a woman going through breast cancer treatment. So to be physiologically ready for what's about to happen if there's an oncological piece, and then the role that exercise and recovery plays after that. So we're trying to look at all the recovery solutions that are used in the elite space and to bring that into the equivalent, like a Fitter Woman app there. So you're getting all the reliable information, you're getting the type of exercise you should be doing. There's a sense that this is being learned from Jessica Ennis and Sonia and whatever. So to me that then means, I mean, elite athletes are great, huge admiration, but I think they're doing okay as well. And there is a sense that if we can learn from the best and apply to the rest, and we have that access. So I think you see that with some of the publications we have. So that's not something we're championing at the minute. I think that would be fantastic.
Would you, we want to kind of follow that through from what started with the athletes making data to what we now have access to as to the public, and the knock-on effect for participation, particularly with the elite clubs we have. All that. The parallels in sports tech and AtlanTec are just so close, which is, that's the potential, which is a bright side.
You're never as depleted. If you think of depletion in terms of recovery post-game, the depletion post-oncology is, I mean, that's essentially turned off all systems. So that's the ultimate challenge of recovery. And we have all that information, and we have the kit and the wearables in our kit use. So I think that would be.
And I suppose Gordon or John, with StatSport or Echo, is that sustainability, is that top of the conversation as well, where you're, developing new stats, developing new devices, and obviously there's a commercial benefit. Is the sustainability piece always there as well? Is that top of the agenda?
Well, it is because, because I work for a corporate, US corporate, private equity backed. So of course that now for any corporation that has to be there, more than diversity, CSR, sustainability, which they're the good things where you see big corporations coming through and how we hold the world accountable. So it depends on the individual feels about that. But they are important, absolutely, as a company.
I just have a quick question. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you all. You've been shortlisted as Sports Business of the Year by the Federation of Irish Sports just now. So, but related to that, I'd be interested to know what the panel's opinion is about a startup. You've all made the point that this industry is potentially massive, and we can all see that it is potentially massive. But how difficult is it going to be for a startup like Yvonne's to penetrate that market and compete against the guys like Garmin and Whoop and everybody else who's in this industry? Kind of related to that, Lisa, the stats that you showed there were phenomenal. It was fantastic. But others have made the point that you need one platform. So are you looking at one particular platform? Are there multiple data feeds coming in? And how difficult is it going to be for startups in this industry, especially from the west of Ireland, coming out of here probably, to actually compete in this global industry?
I'll do the first question anyway. So the sports tech industry is no different than any other one. 8 out of 10 startups fail. So that's really got to be your starting point. But I'm not sure Keith Brock is still here, but the Enterprise Ireland are unique in what they do in a European landscape, probably worldwide, in terms of as a fund that backs startups. So, but it's also the ecosystem, and I suppose from Sports Tech Ireland perspective, that's, you're looking at it here in the room, people who want to help other people get ahead. So we're lucky that we have the oracles and who have done that ahead and will help people. But the other piece on this technical, technology-wise and digital, is that the access to do things, like I know MF, who's still here, started with a quite expensive piece of tech, but actually then Apple upgraded something on the phone, and actually she can do it through the phone because of the sensors on the phone. So, and the same if you look at Amazon, Google, Apple, all programs for startups where they can get access to technologies, so you put your stuff in the cloud and you can run beta versions of what you do. So being able to fail early probably, or actually do something, try it, get it in front of a customer and then pivot to something else is much easier than it was 10 years ago. But also you have a lot of big sports companies that are operators like Arsenal who run their own academy, bring me your innovation. NBA is classic one, they have their own academy of bring your idea, we'll test it, and if it gets through, we'll back it. So in a lot of ways it's easier, but don't underestimate, it's still a business that's trying to get off the ground, and that's really tough.
I think we live in an industry where we're all trying to conform, and I think we have to start to embrace the fact that being different and doing something different is actually a big strength. And I think to do something different creates a level of vulnerability, and we have this with players. You're asking a player to do something different, you're asking them to be vulnerable. So when you create a team environment where you need vulnerability to succeed and grow, you have to create safe vulnerability. So fill your safety net with good people, people who will help you up. I always say life is like a game of snakes and ladders. You know, you'll hit snakes, you'll have your setbacks, you'll hit your ladders, but if someone meets you, what will you be? Will you be a ladder? Be a ladder, and when you get up the ladder, trust me, I've been in situations where I'm the first or the only, and it's so lonely there. So create a good safety net, get good people around you, because you're going to fail loads of times. And the more failures you have, the closer you get to what the answer or what the key margin or that moment, that 1% or that difference is going to be. So, and I think as well with players, you know, they're trying to conform to statistics. We're saying to them, don't conform, be yourself and measure yourself against the performance that you want to achieve or that we believe you can achieve. So I think you have to embrace that. And we're always thinking, I think with something new, think of the reasons not to do it. Start to think about the reasons to do it. It won't be perfect when it's embryonic, but as the time progresses and as it grows, it can become something beyond your wildest dreams. And then when it's born, you've no idea where it's going to go and what it's going to do in its life. So don't be afraid. I think we have to embrace difference and go after that, and be more positive about failure and setbacks than traditionally we are, because that's where we get the creative space, that's where we get the innovation, because that's when people are doing something different, that's when you get something that will make the difference potentially. So I think don't be afraid to, you know, stop look at what's there to eliminate what we already have. What is the stuff that we don't have?
Denise, there's probably potential to flip your questions. I know they're aimed at practitioners. There's probably a potential to twist them a bit for startups to ask themselves, what's the problem I'm trying to fix? What's the challenge here that's needs fixing?
From my perspective as a startup, we have a very vibrant ecosystem in Ireland, just in general, driven by Enterprise Ireland. So one of the key fundamentals of doing, say, the New Frontiers programme was all around making sure you had that product market fit right, and that you did that research before you do anything else. And they will tell you, like, your minimum viable product doesn't need to be the tech. Your minimum viable product could be getting people to sign up to what you may want to be doing in the future, so that you know you've got those customers who are there waiting for you. In terms of earlier, like, I found everybody, like I was saying, everybody is really helpful. We've been talking with some really big names in the industries around partnerships that will give us additional data that, you know, will grow a really robust system. And actually, these are players who are at the very, very top of their game, but they're struggling to get into clubs, so we can bring them to clubs and they can elevate where we're going on a professional level. So I think if you utilise the supports and you're not afraid to ask for help. Now you do have to have credibility. If you don't have credibility, you're dead in the water. You have to have a very strong team around you, and you need to be able to pull that story together when you're speaking to people, so that they believe in you as much as you believe in what you're doing.
Okay, one last question, if anyone.
Just a kind of philosophical question. Does anyone think that there's an argument for actually regulating what data you can use for teams and, you know, and to give to coaches, you know, for games? So rather than just allowing free-for-all analysis of all data, doing what you want to do, or go do what I do as well, should we be regulating it in the same way that the F1 regulates what you can do to a car? You know, so that you can only tell a player a certain amount about, you know, how they've slept, that kind of stuff. I think that'll give us a more kind of bring the human component back into the game, you know, and it's more than about just two players against each other, rather than, you know, Messi's, you know, knows how he slept last night, so he's doing better than, you know, he slept better than whoever he's playing against. Just a question to put it out there.
I mean, I think it comes into the equipment a lot, maybe more than the human being, but the equipment that we use needs to be regulated. In swimming a few years ago, there was super suits brought out, and all of a sudden all the world records got broken. So then they banned all the suits. And in the other sports, there's other similar examples. So I think definitely
But
there's
should we limit
regulation.
it like so that every team in the Premier League, for example, they all have access to the same data. They can only do the same analysis.
Yeah.
Do you think we should do that? You know, is that
But I don't think every sport
make
or
it
every
fairer, I
athlete
suppose, no?
is in that situation, because there's economic disadvantage in certain sports in certain countries and certain areas.
Yeah,
So-
but won't it- if you say in the Premier League, say everyone can only do that certain things with the data, you know, doesn't that kind of level the playing field? Because
Yeah.
you can throw tons of money at it, you know, one team can throw like Newcastle now. Throw loads of money, it's, you know, a problem and potentially fix it, you know, by analysing the data.
That's
So-
exactly what they have done, isn't that? Not it?
No, not necessarily. We've got a lot of time.
That's what happened at the World Cup. So all the teams had access to the same data. So they all had the same live feeds in the game. The players all had their own individual access to their own data, not other players, just their own. And then the match reports are published online for transparency, so everyone can see them. So the fans can engage with it, the media, coaches who want to learn what the top level of the game looks like. And it was really interesting. On Tuesday, I was talking to Chris Houghton, who's the Ghana manager, and he was saying that they didn't have the resources to have the big team that the other teams in the World Cup had. But he said the difference it made to them, the closed gap, they felt they had gained a massive margin by having access. So it's about how we, I suppose for us it's slightly different because we're trying to create an equitable football environment where everybody has a chance, and that we try to level the playing
I
field.
think FIFA should be pushing that on to the, you know, the club levels as well.
That's way low. Way,
It's a slightly different issue though. It's
Yeah.
a slightly different issue though to who owns the personal data. And this is the discussion Grania and I were having, particularly the GA. Like those guys, Messi's getting enough money now for you to stand up there and publish his data. You know, I don't think he's losing any sleep about that, whatever about the sleep score. But you know, the GA people, you know, our athletes are not getting paid. They did not sign a contract. So who owns those rights and who the rights to those data? I think that's a significant, probably, issue that's going to need to be addressed in the coming years. So that's a slightly different issue, and I absolutely don't have an answer on that one.
I think the player protection one would be
Yes.
for me, I know the look at the Premier League particularly and it's not like the rebates and stuff, but actually protecting the player or either they're injured or they just have an off day. You know what I mean? They're not allowed to, you know what I mean? A lot of ways, and we have beaten players with data. So that's a big one in terms of what the approach would be with that. I can't see it being regulation because I wouldn't see that the governing bodies, not FIFA, are going to engage in that because then it's a current discussion for them, so. And it also is even with having this single set of data, it's the questions you're asking about and that would be different for Premier United way, which would be a certain way, and that's not the way that City plays, so there is a piece around that of our system, and is the data telling you that, and sometimes the coach goes override it and say, no, this way, I really win this way, wrong.
And I think it goes back to that point where you've all stressed is it's the combination of the human with the data, and that could always be the edge. Very conscious of people's time, so I'm going to close it off there. If you have an important question, you may be able to catch one of the panelists. I'd like to thank you all for coming again to this AtlanTec event brought to you by AtlanTec, and I'd like to give a big round of applause to the panelists, John, Grania,